Political and Geography campus is really concerned with answering the questions: why is it that Africa has some of the fastest growing economies in the world now? And also, why is it that we've seen some of the most long-lasting conflicts and extensive conflicts on the continent resolved over the last number of years? In the popular media, we often hear about Africa as if it is an environmental wasteland, a place of unmitigated and wide-scale conflict, contracting economies, and a variety of other ills to do with the HIV/AIDS pandemic and so on and so forth. But how do we understand how this has been changing, this picture has been changing across the continent in recent years? My article really tries to explain this with reference to the evolving spatio-temporality of globalization. And in particular, it seeks to identify what the main changes are in the way in which Africa has experienced globalization over the last decade or so. And it highlights a couple of key global events and processes of significance which have fed into the change conditions on the continent. There's been a lot written and a lot of media attention given to the rise of China in Africa over the last number of years. China is now Africa's second largest trading partner after the United States. So this is one thing. This is something which is driving primary commodity prices higher. And China is now the world's largest consumer of copper. Copper prices again in 2011 have hit record highs. The oil price is back over $100 a barrel despite the global financial crisis. China accounts for about 40% of growth globally in oil demand each year. So China is really driving price increases for these critical primary commodities, and as those become scarcer, the prices for them will only go higher through time. The other major influence, or one of the other major influences on the reinvigoration of African economies, has been the re-emergence of South Africa. South Africa was isolated economically during the period of apartheid through United Nations sanctions and also capital controls which were imposed by the domestic government during that period of racial segregation. But South Africa has now emerged since 1994 as a major investor in sub-Saharan Africa in particular. So this is another important influence on the improved growth rates or higher growth rates for many African economies. Combined with that, we've seen there has been major debt relief for those countries who were able to avail of the multilateral debt relief initiative, which was agreed at the Gleneagle Summit in 2005. And Manuel Castells, the well-known sociologist, once talked about Africa as a black hole of informational capitalism. And what we've seen over the last, again, decade or so is that mobile phones have spread very, very rapidly throughout the continent. Penetration rates growing at 50–60% a year, and hundreds of millions of people getting access to these new information technologies. Along with that, we've seen changes in patterns of governance across the continent, and so the article delves into some of the reasons for these as well. And the overall argument of the paper is that what we see in sub-Saharan Africa is a new scalar alignment between global, regional, and national factors. And the article asks whether, in this context of this new scalar alignment between global, regional, and national factors, we could witness the construction of a potentially poverty-reducing developmental regime for the continent. So rather than sub-Saharan Africa as being condemned to slow growth and increasing immiseration, is it possible, as a result of the confluence of the events and the conjuncture of these events and processes around the world, that we're seeing a new evolution in the spatio-temporality of globalization and enhanced potential for poverty reduction? In terms of how instructors might use the article, I think it might be useful in terms of challenging popular misconceptions among students about the nature of African economies and politics. and also in getting them to think about the evolving nature of globalization, and in particular about how China, in addition to the global technological revolution, may be altering the nature of globalization. So I hope you'll find it useful in that context. Thank you.